1. Forgive the amount of detail I love to write, and context is important. At the time, I'm a 35-year-old father of an 8-year-old who I've poured my time and self into, and is just coming into her own as a family. Dual income, busy and stable suburban family. I'm very rational-minded, evidence-based, and purpose-driven. My friends would say I'm the blunt, honest one. I would love to play devil's advocate. I was a devout Christian in my teenage years, but via existential crises, traumatica galore, and an action-packed trip to Afghanistan as a Marine, I mostly believe only what I see. I say that I'm agnostic because I remain unconvinced of the existence or absence of a god, or predestination and anything spiritual. I have a friend from the Marines that went to Afghanistan with me. We started to camp every fall, and we eventually decided to try mushrooms. By the time of this story, I had consumed them at least a dozen times. One night, a little over a year ago, I decided to dabble at home by myself at the end of a Friday night. Everyone was asleep. I was overworked and craving feeling something. So I partook and laid down. Turned on everything everywhere all at once, and felt the waves and tears and joy and profound sadness that connected me to everything. The feeling I had been seeking, that oneness with the earth, that sense of feeling whole. I became really tired and started to doze off, and this is where things start to get interesting. Delirium has entered the chat. I am surrendering to a heavy sleep when suddenly I feel filthy, as if I've not showered for months. I otherwise have only experienced this in Afghanistan, being on missions for weeks, being unable to change, sleeping in trucks. And it felt that level of grungy. I felt driven to shower with divine speed. I opened the door to the master bathroom, which has a shower, bathtub, separate toilet room, and a door to the closet. There is a long mirror over the double vanity, maybe 5 feet high, 12 feet long. I step in, and I'm pulled into what feels like a parallel realm. I felt some kind of invisible transition, and I'm failing to come up with a way to describe it. Taking in my surroundings, I close the door behind me. I'm ankle-deep in warm blood. The room is dark with invisibly placed red and white uplights, and I notice there is some new decor. At least a dozen human corpses are hanging upside down by meat hooks secured through their legs, and the heads were about a foot above the floor. Clearly it was their blood being the reason my ankles were submerged. Contributing to the crimson deluge were these human-winged creatures that resembled demons depicted by the neoclassicals, who were gripping into the flesh of these bodies upside down with their talon-like digits, while feeding on the blood gushing out of their throats. The only sounds audible were the sucking and biting of these things, the dripping of blood into the collective pool, and the chains creaking from the gentle swinging of the bodies. These beings seemed unbothered by my presence, and carried on with their feast. Oddly, I felt no sense of terror, no flight, fight, or freeze sensation, but I did still feel filthy and needed a damn shower. I don't have time for this bull, I thought to myself as I rolled my eyes. There was no clear means of egress to the shower, as the bodies were spaced so closely together, so I had to swing them aside to go through them, and there are thuds as they swing, colliding with each other. The winged friends continued to observe me. As I made my way through, I observed that I knew the faces of these mutilated bodies. They were in fact intimately familiar to me. It was everyone I was ever close to that had died in my life. For some reason, I'm unbothered. I feel just fine with all of this, in some kind of skeptical, delirious trance. I'm not a stranger to horrific nightmares, and there is a numbness I employ. I deny what my eyes and mind are making up, and just want to get warm, wet, and soapy. I finally get through to the shower. I strip and toss my nightwear into what must have been some mixed-up, coagulated mixture of my grandparents' and first mentor's blood. Swing another corpse out of the way, and get the hot water going, observing the swaying shadows in the frosted glass waiting for the water to get hot. My hair on the back stands up and I feel abject terror. Something is watching me. I whip around, bare naked, and in the mirror is what I can best identify as a pale woman. She looked monolithic, timeless, human yet ethereal, beautiful yet terrible, ancient and malicious. Stark white eyes adorned with the palest shade of blue, catching her gaze induced immediate paralysis as I fell an abject sense of terror into the pool of blood. I low-crawled into the shower and closed the door. I sat in the hot water watching the shadows of swaying corpses, until I physically came to when the hot water ran out. I don't know how long I was in there waiting, but it was terrible. I peeped out of the shower door. No blood or bodies. The normal white lights over the vanity were on. Good. I hop out, dry off, and avoid looking in the mirror for good measure. I get dressed and ready for bed, and as I'm opening the door to my bedroom, I feel the sense of being watched again, in my lucid state. My limbs harden with goosebumps, and the hair on my neck stands straight up. I stand there frozen, and my curious nature got the better of me. I turn and look back into the mirror, and I see her as she exits stage right, out of the view from the side of the mirror. I got back into bed, and was rewarded with that warm physical pleasure and laughed myself to sleep. But I look back and think to myself, that was messed up. 2. I'm not sure what kind of entity this is, whether it's a ghost, demon, whatever it is, but it has been tormenting my family for the past few months. We recently got a puppy, which has brought a lot of happiness for everyone in the house. Ever since we got the puppy, the spirit has been quite aggressive. It has mainly been picking on my mom, as she is the weakest person mentally. My sister, who is chronically ill, has also been active. She has moved more in the past 2 months than she has in the past 5 years. She has made amazing progress ever since the puppy. My sister claims she's not had anything weird happen and she hasn't seen anything. A few weeks ago, I was talking with my sister and I looked out the window. I saw a female entity walking past. She was wearing a raggedy white dress with black hair. She pretty much looked like the girl from The Grudge. She walked past the window in about 1.5 seconds, so I didn't get a great look at her face. My dad also saw a similar female figure. It was peeking around a corner staring at him. He saw it in the corner of his eye, and when he looked over, it was gone. This has happened a few times now. My dad has a friend who claims to have spirit-walked or astral projected. Not sure in the term, to be honest. But he came to our house around 1:45 a.m., We had no knowledge of him coming. At 2:30, my mom woke up for some reason. She then asked my dad if he could ask his friend, Jay. She was curious if Jay had visited at 2:30, which he had. Jay said he saw the entity while he was there, but it was avoiding him because it knew Jay was trying to get rid of it. The next day, when my dad asked Jay if he visited that night, he said yes. My dad then showed him a picture of the Grudge, and Jay freaked out, saying, "That looks just like it. Why do you have that picture?" I found it very interesting that he saw the same thing me and my dad did. Jay has told us that the entity hates happiness, so that's making it mad. It also hates fire, so we have a bunch of candles set up around the house. The entity has been targeting my mom, feeding her awful thoughts. The other day, my dad couldn't sleep because of a light from the candle, so he put it out. As he was trying to fall asleep, he was fed terrible thoughts. Stuff about how he is a failure and his family isn't proud of him, things like that. My dad is the most positive person I know. He would never think like that. Again, I just found that interesting that it happened almost right after he put out the candle. Another similar thing happened to my mom. She was perfectly fine all day and had no negative thoughts. Then, out of nowhere, while folding laundry, she had awful thoughts for no reason. Then she looked up and saw that the candle near her was put out somehow again. Interesting. We've had strange experiences throughout our whole 20 years of living in this house. When I was about 9 years old, I used to hear an old man speaking to me, waking me up in the middle of the night. I also used to occasionally see a Grim Reaper-type figure that would peek around corners. Not just in my house, but it would follow me everywhere. That all stopped when I was about 13. When my sister was little, she used to see a girl who would stand in her doorway just staring at her. It never went in her room, though. Some more background info is somewhere on our property is a piece of glass that was from the Eastern State Penitentiary in Pennsylvania. My dad had put the piece of glass in a shed, and overnight, the shed had collapsed, and we have never found that piece of glass. So it's still somewhere on my property. Personally, I don't believe in any of this and haven't experienced any negative thoughts. 3. I am currently a 23-year-old man, and I feel like I've been experiencing something paranormal most of my life. My first ever experience was when I was around the age of 5 to 8. Sorry, it's been a while. Anyways, early one morning, I decided to watch TV in my parents' bedroom, and was just minding my business when I heard my nickname that the family calls me, Bubby, out of nowhere. Mind you, my family was sound asleep, as more than likely it was a weekend and my family was a very busy bunch. While living in this house, I experienced some crazy things. For clarification, as a child, and even as a grown man, I was afraid of the dark. Not so much of the dark itself, but what was in it. So needless to say, many nights I would fall asleep with my parents, or in their room laying on the floor. Well, one night, and this isn't the last you'll hear about this particular event, I was sleeping by myself in my parents' bed, and for whatever reason decided to look under their bed. I pulled the sheets up, and staring at me were bright yellow eyes. Mind you, I was very young and I had no idea what to do, so I just put the sheets back down and played next to the wall. During the years while living in this house, I saw shadows moving or forming. I had an out-of-body experience where I was aware of what was happening around me, but while in this state, was under my bed and heard the most evil laugh I've ever heard in my life. I also had terrible sleepwalking problems, and was told 10 years later that I kept trying to leave the house. Now fast forward to the year 2011. By this point I was in my pre-teens and was much more aware of my surroundings and what goes on around me. In 2011, my dad got a job promotion that required us to move to the state of Oklahoma. The events I will talk about traumatized me as a kid, and I'd like to think put me on the path of never sleeping in the dark again. Anyways, the activity didn't start until a few months of living in our new house. The first encounters that I can remember is hearing footsteps and running down our hall. Our floors were carpet, so I could really hear if someone was walking down the hall. I would hear running, and of course, I was still deathly scared of the dark by this point, so I'd often sneak into my parents' room to sleep with them. Well, one night I positioned myself on the floor and saw bright yellow eyes again staring right at me. I was frozen with fear and just remembered drifting off. Every other night I'd wake up to hearing running or walking through the hallway, but nothing could prepare me for what happened. I feel I must mention my father is in the military, and every now and then he would have to leave for a few weeks, for drill and training. I mention this because it's important to paint the scene. Anyways, my mom, sister, and I decided to sleep in the living room. Well, that night I woke up hearing something in our kitchen, and when I sat up in my recliner I was sleeping on, I saw something that is engraved in my mind for the rest of my life. About 10 to 15 feet from me, I saw the silhouette of a woman standing at our back door inside our house. While this is going on, chairs are moving in our kitchen, and I am frozen with fear. All I can remember doing is crying and eventually passing out from what I assumed to be fear. Now, admittedly, I was curious. There must have been a reason why I have been experiencing this activity. So I started trying to figure out what happened to this woman and why she was here. But before we get to that, I have one more instance to tell you about. Again, my father left for drill, but instead of sleeping in the living room, we decided to sleep in my room. So naturally, I had to sleep on the floor because my sister and mom slept in my bunk beds. Anyways, as I sleep on the floor, my door suddenly opens, and clear as day, I see a gun start to emerge from the opening of the door, and I see a man, but just as quick as he came, he was gone. I saw him multiple times that night, and the only thing that got me through the night was thinking about Super Mario Brothers. True story. Anyways, while trying to figure out what happened, I stumbled upon some very interesting items buried throughout the property. I found a buried Tonka truck in the front of our house. I found multiple rifle shell casings on the side of our house. So days go by, and I'm home alone at the house one day, just by myself, and I start feeling like I'm being watched. And I don't know if this makes sense, but what I can explain is that I felt an overwhelming amount of fear. So I decided in that moment to run as fast as I possibly could to the front door and went outside and just kept running. What I saw shocked me. I turned around and saw the same silhouette at the door staring at me, and then proceeded to walk out of my current line of view. The last experience I had at that house was the most fascinating. Once again, I had another experience while dreaming, but this time, I saw the woman in my dream. She was talking to me, telling me to run when all of a sudden a car pulled up to our house. Men started coming out of the vehicle and started shooting at the house and screaming. Personally, I feel like the spirit was trying to tell me something. Maybe what happened to it. Now this is where I start bringing in other experiences, but not of my own from this house. My father and his buddy both woke up many nights hearing the same noises I heard, but when they'd investigate, of course, they'd find nothing. After that, every house I've lived in had experiences, whether opening doors or running or footsteps or just feeling like you're being watched. I've never felt like I was in danger, and admittedly, I talked to myself. So after a while, I just started having conversations with the spirits. Obviously not getting any replies. I would discuss my interests, or just talk about nothing, or I'd just vent and talk. I will say, however, that I feel like something has followed me, but I have no idea from what house. All I know is that I have never been harmed, the worst being feeling like I'm being watched. Personally, I try to look at it as maybe a guardian angel, and at the very worst a lonely spirit, who is comforted with my presence. Admittedly, the activity has died down now, but every now and then something will knock on my door, or my door will open. Obviously, I'm a little scared due to what I've been through, but I immediately just talk to it, or myself, and just include it in my conversations. I'm open to discussions and opinions, and I'm curious as to what everyone thinks. Before I die, I'd like to visit that house again one more time, and confront that spirit if it's still there, and just see if it remembers me, as well as ask if it was trying to tell me how she died. So, long story short, I don't sleep without my TV on, and I keep something playing because I hate silence. Honestly, can you blame me? 4. I think I saw a folklore creature. This happened back in April. I went to a lakeside cabin with my family to celebrate my brother's birthday over the weekend. The cabin belongs to my sister-in-law's family. It's a gorgeous place surrounded by woods, and I hadn't felt that connected to nature in a long time. The cabin is in a different state from the one I live in, and it was a 5-hour drive to get there. Also, this is a good time to mention that this took place in Brazil. I spent the whole Saturday playing with my 3-year-old niece. We swam in the lake, played in the pool, and explored under rocks to see what bugs we could find. When nighttime came around, we all had dinner and stayed up late talking, singing, that kind of thing. I was the first adult to go to bed because I usually sleep early, and I was feeling that good exhaustion that comes from a day well lived. I had planned to wake up around 4:30 a.m. to make coffee and watch the sunrise from the deck that stretched out into the water. However, I ended up getting up at around 4 a.m. because I couldn't really stay asleep. I had woken up many times throughout the night and was having these weird dreams I couldn't really remember. When I decided to get up, all that was left of them in my mind was a name. Machita Pereira. It's the name of a creature from Brazilian folklore, and I didn't really know why it came to mind, because it isn't a very well-known tale in the region I lived and grew up in. The only previous contact I had with it was from a song that only mentions its name. I didn't know the story behind it, so I just thought, how weird, and went on with my plans to make coffee and wait for the sunrise, sitting on the deck. While I was making coffee, I heard my niece crying from the room she was sharing with her parents. I got worried, of course, but figured her parents would deal with whatever was going on. So I headed for the deck and sat down. My niece had stopped crying, everything was fine. I was sitting on the deck, watching the stars and listening to the sounds of the night. The water against the wooden structures of the deck, the splashing of frogs and fish, the call from nocturnal birds. I was in heaven. I should mention I got my degree in biology, with speciality in zoology back in 2018, and even though I followed a different career path, I'm still pretty much enchanted by nature. While I was at uni, me and my friends would birdwatch during most weekends, identifying the species and all that. This is to say, I know my way around Brazilian birds. This is important for the story. So there I was, enjoying my coffee and the rest of the night before dawn, when everything became silent. No more animal sounds. It was like the whole landscape had been devoid of life, and in came a sense of being watched. That gut sensation of impending doom. I was really scared. It was like I had been transported to a dying land, and I was next. I've had my fair share of scares while in the woods, but I had never heard nature going silent. I even considered I might have been dreaming at that moment, trapped lucid in a subconscious state of mind. I decided to look back at the house because that's where I felt I was being watched from. Maybe someone else woke up and is trying to figure out who's sitting in the middle of the deck in the darkness. When I looked back at the house, I didn't really see anything, until I looked towards the roof. It was a full moon, and it was bright enough to see it reflecting from what looked like jet-black feathers on a massive bird-like creature. I froze instantly, started searching in my mind for what species of bird that could be. But there was none. It was the size of a freaking person. I couldn't see his beak or his face. It was like it was wearing a hooded veil, and only the shape of his head was visible. All I could see was the body, skinny but sort of flappy, and its wings. It looked like it was adjusting them for flight, waiting for the right moment. I wanted to scream, to run away, but I was frozen in place watching this impossible creature. Suddenly it opened its massive wings fully and flew to the right, towards the woods. Almost instantly the sounds came back. Frogs, birds, the water, and the first colors of sunrise were starting to show. I just broke down crying, feeling like I was losing my grip on reality. But Machita Pereira was burning in my brain, and when I looked it up I was floored. The accounts talk about a massive black bird that disrupts people's lives when they make deals with Machita and don't follow through. I don't know why it was there, if it was after something from a family member of mine who was there, or if it was just passing by. All I know is that my niece has been experiencing night terrors that, coincidentally or not, started last night. 5. This started a long time ago, but it was only within the last 6 months I was able to finally realize it. You may find me crazy, but I hope I've come to the right place for advice, information, or a finger in the right direction of where to ask. Something has become attached to me. When it started, it was this feeling of dread I'd get every once in a while, almost akin to a childlike fear of the dark. This persisted for some time, and I just chalked it up to being me. Fast forward quite some time, and this feeling begins to change. I start feeling something there right by me or watching me from a short distance. This continues for some time, and was when I started to feel maybe I was suffering from a mental illness of some kind. So I started watching and evaluating more. It's got to the point, for a while, eventually, that any time I went outside after sundown, I would have to bring a super powerful light to illuminate to even feel remotely safe. That continues on for a while until maybe about 4 months ago now. I was outside cleaning up one night after a party I had thrown, and initially I didn't feel anything, and I hadn't even noticed I didn't feel anything. The issues came when I set a collapsible floodlight I own down to go inside for a moment to get my necklace. Which let me backtrack really quick. My girlfriend is very spiritual. She's native through and through, and is thoroughly in touch with things I'm only beginning to understand. She made me a warding or protection amulet from various herbs from her garden. This necklace did seem to help after some time, although I only had it for a few weeks before this incident. So, back to going inside to get my necklace. As I'm coming back out, my floodlight is unclapped, stood upright with the light on. And I lost it. I mean truly lost it, and as I did, a dread came over me. For the next few days, things would happen, they'd move, and I would notice it, and even my girlfriend would notice it. This was around the time she started talking to me about the concept of starving it, and I began working on various meditations, mind-clearing, and other various things to begin combating this thing. I've even begun what I think is my spiritual awakening in the process. I've begun to feel energies and notice things that aren't physically there, but that's a whole side note. But fast forward some time. I'm working on starving my adversary, and it's going quite well. I got to the point most nights were fine, no feelings, nothing. I thought I was winning and fighting it back. Then came the camping trip we took a few days ago. We left on Sunday for a campground down on an island on the coast of Georgia. We got there, and it was wonderful. But as we were coming in and got into the thick of the island, I began to have a feeling, not the dread, more like an excitement, or a surplus energy, and I chalked it up as excitement. After some time later, once we had set up camp, she mentioned during conversation how energized the island was and how much she loved it, and I was curious if that was the feeling I had felt. The day went on, and the night passed uneventfully. It was the next night that everything came crashing down. The day was fine. I'm a big biker, love trails and nature, so we spent all day biking some nature trails. And that evening we had planned to go biking towards the historic district of the island for a night walk. Before we did that, we headed to the beach to spend some time watching the sunset, and before it was full dark, we loaded up and got ready to ride for the district. About 15 minutes into our ride, we pulled off and chatted for a minute to reconfirm my plans, as my girlfriend had forgotten where we were going. We spent some time debating on whether to head back for the night or continue our journey. I was worried she was tired, but she insisted that she was wanting to go on, so we went. We continued on the wide bike path that ran parallel to the road, cutting through the woods at times. We were using headlamps as the island doesn't have many street lamps. But the horror began when we passed through a miniature park with a well-lit neighborhood to our left. I was approximately 10 feet ahead of my girlfriend when she called out to me to come back. And I did, and right across the road was a deer just watching us. It stared at us and followed us with its head as we moved, and it just teetered. I at first thought it was cool. I was very excited to get to see a deer so close. We eventually got riding again, and not 2 minutes later we came through a very similar park section with another neighborhood. It's a line of 3 of them in a row. Each neighborhood has its own park-like section at the end across the street. But this time, there was a deer standing right next to the bike path watching us. Just watching. We flew by and it didn't move. It stayed right there, and when I looked back, it was just watching, not moving. God, I'm terrified just thinking about this. My girlfriend and I both hit a panic and started to pick up our pace. We were zipping through the path now when we passed what is the largest female deer I've ever seen. Again, just watching us. At that point, we pulled into the parking lot, well lit once we got off the path and on the road. And then it hit me. It all hit me so hard. The dread, the panic, everything. And this indescribable feeling that I knew I was going to die. I started to panic. I don't want to die, but I was certain I was going to. I started apologizing for all my wrongs. I started explaining to her, something's wrong. I'm going to die. Please help me. And she remained calm and helped me. I panicked, and eventually, during the conversation, I had panicked enough, and I was going to go and walk and bike and accept my death. So we went walking back the way we came, but on the road this time. And not 3 minutes down the road, we passed 3 deer standing and watching us, and I almost broke. She was terrified, and so was I. I asked her what was happening. She is native, and deer are an essential part of their way of life, and she said deer are for fertility and only good things. But I knew something was going to kill me. I kept trying to walk on the wrong side of the road, and she kept having to call me back. And I tried to run into someone's house, and we just kept passing deers. You don't understand. It was like a real-life horror movie. It was a long walk back, and I was convinced the entire way that I was going to die this night. I was begging, I was pleading with life, I was bargaining. I have never felt so close to death. I've been hit by a car while walking. I've been trapped under a very large rock in a raging river. I've been in a wreck. I've had near-death experiences. But nothing felt as close to death as this. I was certain I was going to die. Everything I've ever done and ever wanted to do came through my head. Before we made it back to camp, we passed a large group of deer who watched us coming down the road, and then they ran. We eventually made it back to camp, and I start to feel okay. I had never been so thankful in my life ever, and we started to collect wood for a fire. She insisted on a fire, and I immediately felt the dread again. I could feel it watching me, waiting and watching and hunting me. I felt like I was being tracked by something horrid. I felt like I was being tracked the whole night back to my camp and throughout the night and watched. We made the fire, and she had me throw some fresh leaves in hopes of warding off, which may have helped. But I never felt okay. I didn't sleep much that night. I was too terrified to sleep. Maybe it was squirrels or raccoons walking at night, but something was walking outside of our tent and in the woods. I had a horrid dream that night, a black figure standing across the street from me, and I awoke screaming, my girlfriend said. And apparently I bit her, thankfully not hard enough to break skin, but enough to hurt the next day. We talked the next day. We talked about what had happened the night before. She explained some things about deer and their significance to me, and brought to my attention what was actually going on last night. Because over the course of all that, I thought it was a deer or something native that had come for me, because of her, or something like that. It wasn't until she talked to me about it being my adversary that it all clicked. The deer weren't after me, they were just watching in horror. She saw it too. And this is what made me write this, because I've always thought maybe I'm just crazy. The third deer we saw was laying in a ditch, and she passed it at first, as by then she had pulled ahead, so I could see her when she passed it, which was a moment before I came around the corner. She said, coming up to it, she saw a large black voidless rectangle, and that the third deer looked at her as she passed, then looked at it, and it had been formed into a man. She said she knew then that it was my friend who had followed me here, and he must have been able to plug into the energy of the island to topple my walls and my ways of protection. And the deer scaring me was all a perfect storm. I believe all of this to be true. I'm looking for a direction to go in fixing this. I'm back at ground zero. I can only imagine how much that fed it, but I'm going to work to starve it again and break away from it. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to Paranormal Stories, episode 382. And thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use their stories in this video. Before you go, please hit the like button and share the video with friends and family. And if you want early access to these videos, easy to do. Support me on my Patreon page for as little as $1 or more a month, which is linked in the description. You'll get all the videos on the Monday all at once. You'll also find links there to the Hellfreezer Discord server if you'd like to join us over there, as well as a link to the Hellfreezer merchandise store on Teespring. And if you really enjoyed today's video, why not leave a tip? Do that by clicking on the heart with the $ sign underneath the video player, Of course, that is never required, but I very much appreciate it if you choose to do so. Thank you kindly. Okay, let's move right along to Hellfreezer's question of the day. And today's question is... Okay, this one's controversial. It actually is kind of controversial. I've seen people literally tearing into each other online about it. But we're nice people, so we're going to be civil. Are you a shoes on or shoes off for your guest kind of home? And if you are a shoes off kind of home, how do you approach it? Personally speaking, I do not want people entering my home and taking their shoes off because I don't want your feet on my floors. You keep your shoes on. I'll vacuum when you leave. I'll probably wipe down the surfaces as well because I'm like that. But I also feel that if you are a shoes off household, I respect that. You've got to do what makes you comfortable in your own home, within reason. Don't be burying bodies under the floorboards. That's just weird. But I think you have to tell your guests before they get to your house. Don't leave it last minute, because you spring that on someone, you might get a negative reaction. And as they used to say in a different context, a refusal often offends. So, if that's the case, and your guest doesn't want to do it, you can meet in public somewhere. I think that's a fair compromise. Obvious exceptions being tradespeople where it's a safety issue, and maybe they'll wear foot coverings, but there are occasions where that might be a little slippery and unsafe. Of course, I say this as someone who just doesn't want people coming to my home. I only like people I know very, very, very well. So basically just myself and Jack. Is that weird? I hope that's not weird. If it is, I guess I'll make my peace with it. Anyway, why don't you let me know what you think, if you're comfortable sharing, and please be nice to each other in a comment below. And before we go, let's have the answer of the day from a previous video. And this was about your go-tos for making sandwiches. Mine was cheese. And today's answer comes from Regina Heinemann. Cheese with dill, pickle, and mustard. Best sandwich ever. Straight to the point, I appreciate that, and that does sound very delicious. And with that, I'm gonna head off for now, so until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourself.